The area that Brian asked me to have a look at today was around project management, and perhaps look at why some of those projects might succeed and why some of those might fail. And that obviously fits in quite nicely with the whole theme of today, I believe. So I guess there are some important questions in that, but I'll try and approach it from this perspective. So if you looked at any good leadership handbook, any leadership consultants that you might encounter and use in your organization will probably tell you that actually failure is an important part of winning. And certainly when you look at projects and how the project work develops, you can see some of that start to make sense. And there are lots and lots of quotes from lots and lots of famous people about trying and trying and trying and trying and trying again until you get to the important point of actually getting the success. And having that right environment, listening back to what Gillian was talking about as well just a moment ago, creating that environment where people can learn from how they're delivering projects and programs, and indeed their regular jobs anyway, is probably now more important than absolutely demanding success of people. You've got to be able to create an environment in which your teams are actually okay with failing, because from that will come eventually, we hope, some success. So unless you live in a particular world, in your environment, and the business you work in, the market you work in, demands that unwavering compliance and obedience, where you would expect to be treated like this if you make a failure, I suspect probably where we're at for most of us in the work we're doing today, we need to be looking a little bit more like this when we encounter failure in some of our projects. If we have to expect zero failure and zero tolerance of any errors or any issues, then that's pretty unreasonable, isn't it? We are setting people up to fail from the get-go because things are going to go wrong. So if we start to demand the top approach here of being shouted at and bawled out and embarrassed in front of your peers if you make a mistake, then morale is certainly going to go off a cliff, I would expect, and all the opportunity to think outside the box, that innovation that we want to see in our workplaces now, it's all going to be stifled, isn't it? It's going to be crushed. Nobody wants to be shouted at like that, probably not even if you're in the army, but I suspect it has its place in the forces. So mistakes and failure, we have to allow them. We have to be in some ways comfortable with them. We have to let them happen some cases, so that people can have some experience and they can draw on that and they can understand actually about the best way to go forward. And this is important in projects just as it is in anything else, as I said. We need people to be thinking outside the box today. Traditional thinking, traditional ways of approaching things just doesn't work anymore. I mean, the way everybody now has to work remotely, we've got people that we be used to gathering people together in a room to have a project meeting. It's just not really possible anymore unless there's only two of you and it's a massive room. So innovation and doing things differently is now absolutely where we need everybody to be. So you've got to set the culture correctly. And I suspect that's been mentioned a few times today. It's not something you can do quickly. It's not something that can be done overnight. It will take time, but it is so important to get right. If you're shutting people down for small mistakes and not allowing them to learn, then you are going to fail overall. That's almost a given, I would say. Importantly, though, we should remember that if something has gone very well and you've succeeded and it's gone brilliantly and somehow you've delivered under time and under budget, which in an IT project is kind of, I guess, what we'd all love. How did you do that? How did you make that success? How did you make it work properly? And what learning can you take out of that to bake back into your process to make sure that it happens correctly again next time? So how can you make being better the norm? So in Dorset, we have quite a simple approach to how we're dealing with our digital strategy as a system. So that includes all of the organisations that you can see there on the side, on the slide there. Acute hospitals, GP practices, local authorities, public health, the ambulances, and then beyond that, all of the organisations that support them. So care homes, nursing homes, those homes involved in very specific care like Marie Curie or our Weldmar hospices and things like that. How do we start to create an environment in which everybody feels like they can succeed by being part of what we're doing? So we have delivered the same structure, the same digital strategy since 2016. So we've kept it very consistent. We have allowed people, therefore, to be comfortable to say, right, well, I know who's going to be looking after that, and I know where that is, and they can be relied upon to deliver it. Because of the pace now of demand of what we're doing, we believe that's quite important. There's no time, very definitely not any time, for stagnating in a role or for people to get bored, because there is just so much that people can get involved in. So we have multiple organizations, and we have different people from these organizations delivering key pieces of work. So we've generated an environment here in which an organization will take responsibility for a piece of work on behalf of all their peers. And as a result, there's a degree of responsibility in that, isn't there? Because nobody wants to let down their colleagues and their peers. So they create that need to deliver and to make it work. You may have noticed on the slides that I've got here, there aren't any NHS logos. Whilst I work for the NHS, I very much see myself as somebody who's working for the population of Dorset rather than necessarily for an individual organisation. So one of the things I said to one of my teams, and it was the projects team, a short while ago, maybe 2 years ago now, which in hindsight wasn't perhaps the smartest thing to say to them in a straight up way, was there are no more IT projects. And when they'd all picked themselves up off the floor and tried to work out if they still had a job and if this was a way of me telling them they didn't, I went on and explained that a little bit further. There aren't really any more just IT projects, because everything we do in health and social care will have an impact on a patient. It will change potentially how a clinician works. It will change how a service is delivered. And ultimately, at the end of that, there is a patient. There's one of us at the end of that. So projects aren't about IT anymore. They're not about tin. They're not about wiring. They're not about applications and apps and all that sort of stuff. They're about the person who's going to sit at the center of being a recipient of what we're doing. So how do you make sure then that your projects can be successful? So there are some tactics you can deploy in that. And again, there are lots of books and consultants that will come and tell you how to do it. But in our world, in the NHS side, it's about making sure they're clinically led. If you're going to make a change to how a clinician works, believe me, and there'll be lots of people on the call who will have this experience. If you go and try and tell a clinician they need to do something differently, it's not going to work very well. If you can use stakeholder engagement, have a clinician on board, and they can go and have the conversation with your clinical colleagues, then you stand a much greater chance of it working. So got to have the patient at the center of what we're doing, at least from our side. But common to any project, having those clear common goals. In my world where I live, having that shared leadership opportunity with organizations taking leads on behalf of their colleagues. Having that iterative process. So if something is starting to go wrong, and almost regardless of whether you're doing waterfall, agile, or any other way of progressing your project, having some way of having the touch points regularly enough that you can catch when something's happening and adjust and realign the delivery is just absolutely necessary, isn't it? Whether that's monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, depending on the importance and urgency of the project. Putting some sort of root cause analysis in to support the learning. And as I said earlier, that's not just about where stuff's gone wrong, but about where it's gone right. How can you make sure that getting stuff right becomes important? And then the benefits tracking at the end. If we start to do all of that, all of those sorts of things, we move into the sort of more cultural elements of this. It's getting that environment right in which people can operate, knowing that if they get it wrong, your colleague's going to have your back. Your leader's going to have your back. There's not going to be any kind of blame apportioned to this. There needs to be some ownership of what's gone on, and you need to go, yeah, mea culpa, I got that bit wrong. But the learning that comes out of that needs to be fed back in, and people need to be comfortable allowing a bit of failure to happen so they can move forward. it's always traditionally been important, hasn't it, in a leadership role, that you're seen to be setting the example and you're leading the way and showing others how it should be done. But I believe in our organisations, in a project environment, that anybody from the PSO up to the SRO should be working in the similar way, should be working in the same way. Whilst the accountability for what happens might be different, let's face it, it will be, everybody should be working in the same method, to the same style, and there should be no victimisation or blame in what happens. So I guess to finish that off, leadership is going to be all about people. It's not about the organisation, it's not even about the projects or the plans or the strategies. It's about the people and making sure you create an environment in which people feel they can thrive, they can grow, they can learn, and by making mistakes, they can learn how to improve themselves and what they're delivering. We have to be people-centered. And I quite like that quote from Colin Powell, which I put it on here as the final slide, because we cannot achieve anything we set out to achieve as leaders without our teams. And if we create an environment in which they feel threatened or nervous or anxious or apprehensive about bringing forward the fact that they've made a mistake, then that gets hidden and the mistake gets bigger, and what you're trying to achieve will just become harder. We have to get that environment right. We have to allow people to make mistakes and help them learn from them.